You know what hurts more than physical pain? It's when the person who's supposed to love you unconditionally weaponizes your worst fear in front of a room full of people and laughs while doing it. Do you know that kind of sting? Where your breath catches not from surprise, but from the quiet, humiliated acceptance that this isn't the first time, just the loudest. Before I begin, take a moment. If this kind of thing has ever happened to you, hit like, subscribe, and drop your location and local time in the comments. Maybe you've been the quiet one too, the underestimated one, the failure everyone pities until they need you. Now, let's listen to my story journey. It happened at a steakhouse, one of those overpriced places with booths wrapped in dark green leather and waiters who pretend you're important if you order bottled water instead of tap. It was my 30th birthday. My mom organized the dinner herself, which already felt strange. She doesn't usually celebrate failure, as she once put it when I forgot to land that corporate internship my sister's friend got her into. There were 9 of us. My mom at the head of the table, flanked by her boyfriend Craig, regional VP at whatever firm she now worshipped, and a few colleagues I barely recognized. My older sister Becca was there too, all designer earrings and forced concern. And me, in a thrifted dress I hoped looked new enough. Dessert was served with a candle I didn't ask for. Then came the speeches. Craig went first, said something hollow about persistence and late bloomers. I smiled politely, cheeks already burning. Then Becca gave a sentimental toast full of phrases like, "You've got heart, kiddo," which would have landed better if she hadn't been checking her phone every 5 seconds. But nothing could have prepared me for what came next. Mom stood up, holding her wine like a trophy. "Oh, Maya," she began with that smile. That sharp, tight-lipped smirk she wears when she's about to carve someone up but still wants credit for being honest. "You've always marched to your own drum," she said, "even when the rest of us were screaming at you to get in step." A few polite chuckles. I kept smiling. My stomach turned. "I remember when you quit that admin job," she continued. "What was it? After 3 weeks? You said something about it being soul-sucking. And now you're, what do you call it again? Consulting? Out of your bedroom?" Laughter now. From the colleagues. One of them wiped his eye. "But hey," she raised her glass. 30 years of figuring it out. Maybe 31's your lucky number. I didn't respond. Couldn't. I sat there, a grown woman, swallowing the urge to leave my own birthday. Because what would that prove? That she was right? That I was still too sensitive, too dramatic, too fragile? So I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted metal and stared at the wax pooling around my untouched candle. And the worst part? She didn't even think she was being cruel. She thought she was being funny, clever, realistic. She thought maybe she was doing me a favor. She didn't know, none of them did, that I was 2 weeks away from the beta launch of a project that had consumed every waking hour for the last year. That while they toasted to my failure, I was quietly building something they couldn't imagine. I drove home alone that night, gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. Not from rage, not yet. From clarity. Because for the first time in my life, I saw her clearly not as mom, not as provider, not even as critic, but as a woman terrified that someone like me, a dropout, a weirdo, a disappointment, might do something she could never predict. Might succeed without her approval. And that scared her more than any failure ever could. I got home, shut the door quietly, sat on the edge of my mattress on the floor, kicked off my boots, and opened my laptop. The dashboard lit up with the soft blue glow of code. I took a deep breath, and I kept building. Because if they were going to laugh at me, I'd give them something worth choking on. You ever notice how some kids just know how to keep the peace? Not because they're wise beyond their years, but because they have to be. Because the chaos around them doesn't leave room for loud dreams or messy opinions. That was me, the quiet one, the peacekeeper, the background daughter. Becca got the spotlight, the applause, the bragging rights. I got the leftovers of time, of attention, of belief. I used to think it was because she was older, more polished, more obedient. But as I got older, I realized it was simpler than that. She fit the mold. I didn't. From an early age, I was asking questions no one wanted to answer. Why does mom cry in the laundry room when she thinks we're asleep? Why does dad sleep on the couch when they say everything's fine? And later, Why do we pretend like things are okay when they're clearly falling apart? That kind of honesty made people uncomfortable. So I learned to fold in on myself, not to lie exactly, but to edit, shrink, soften. Mom called me too sensitive. Teachers called me creative but distracted. Becca called me weird. I wasn't weird. I was observant. While other kids were playing house, I was taking apart old radios in the garage just to see how they worked. While Becca practiced cheer routines, I taught myself basic HTML on our crusty old family desktop. And every time I brought her something, I'd built an early photo filter app, a blog layout, even a glitchy little scheduling tool. Mom would smile and say, "That's cute, Maya. But when are you going to focus on something real?" Real, in her world, meant safe, predictable, corporate, something that could be explained in one line at a dinner party. Becca worked in insurance. That was real. I wanted to build things that solved actual problems. But try putting that on a resume when your only experience is self-taught everything. So I played along, went to college, declared a major I didn't care about, smiled through group projects with guys who talked over me, walked across the stage in my cap and gown while Mom snapped photos and whispered, "Finally." But the truth? I never stopped building, in secret, at night, on borrowed time and Wi-Fi from the neighbor's unsecured network. After graduation, while Becca got promoted to regional manager and started looking at condos, I bounced from job to job, admin assistant, receptionist, customer support, at a fintech company where I lasted 6 months before walking out mid-shift because I couldn't stand watching another middle-aged man explain my own code back to me like I was a child. Mom said I was throwing away my future. Becca said I needed to stop acting like a victim. What they didn't understand, what they never even tried to understand, was that I wasn't lost. I was just not interested in climbing a ladder I didn't build. But you can't explain that to people who measure success in title bumps and LinkedIn endorsements. So I drifted, from gig to gig, from couch to couch, from city to city, chasing tiny contracts and big ideas that didn't quite land. I lived on black coffee, frozen dumplings, and hope. There were nights I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was wrong. If maybe this path I was so determined to carve was just delusion wrapped in pride. Because being different sounds brave until it's lonely. Until it means you're eating alone on Thanksgiving, while your mom posts family photos without you. Until it means your own birthday becomes a roast and you're the punchline. Still, through all of it, I kept working, learning, watching, stacking little pieces of skill and insight and code like bricks in a wall only I could see. And behind that wall, a shape was starting to form. A solution, a product, a system that might just matter. But I wasn't ready. Not yet. I needed one more push, one more humiliation to turn the heat up just high enough to burn away the last of my self-doubt. That push came 2 weeks after the steakhouse. Mom called me to check in, which really meant to ask if I'd applied for the office assistant role her friend had at the logistics firm. I told her no, that I was working on something. She sighed so loud I could hear her shake her head. "You're 30, Maya," she said. "At some point, dreams need to make room for reality." I stared at the floor as she spoke, knees pulled up to my chest. And somewhere in the middle of her monologue about stability and health insurance and how Becca just closed on her second property, something in me broke. Or maybe it clicked, because instead of feeling ashamed, I felt focused, clear. It was time to stop trying to earn her approval. Time to stop measuring my life against a yardstick she didn't build. Time to prove, if only to myself, that I wasn't a failure, just unfinished. And so I hung up the phone, opened my laptop, and started from scratch. A new build, a new plan. This time, I wasn't waiting for permission. There's a particular kind of quiet that settles in when you've got no money, no job, and no applause. It's not peaceful. It's hollow. Like the silence after someone forgets your name at a family gathering. That was my life for a while. No office, no team, no calendar invites. Just me, my laptop, and the echo of all the things I hadn't achieved. After I hung up on my mom that day, I gave myself 1 week. 1 week to stop sulking. 1 week to stop scrolling job listings I didn't care about. 1 week to prove to myself, if no one else, that I could still build something that mattered. So I started where I always do, with a problem no one else seemed to be solving. A former freelance client, a local therapist who ran her own practice, had vented to me months ago about how hard it was to manage session notes, client forms, and compliance tasks across multiple systems. None of the tools were built for solo practitioners. Most were bloated, clunky, or expensive. I'd helped her automate a few spreadsheets at the time. She loved it, said I should turn it into a product. I brushed it off back then, but now it felt like something. Not revolutionary, not sexy, but real, needed, scalable. So I called her, asked 100 questions, took notes like a madwoman. Then I opened a fresh file, named it Quiet Mind. A working title, though I kind of loved it, and got to work. I had no funding, no team, no roadmap beyond what I could scribble on a napkin between bites of instant noodles. But I had time, and fury, and a very specific voice in my head saying, at some point, dreams need to make room for reality. So I let that voice fuel me. I worked out of the corner table at an old diner that didn't mind if I sat for hours with just a refillable cup of coffee. I used free versions of every tool I could find. I bartered design help from a junior UX grad in exchange for editing her resume. I beta tested on therapist forums, offering early access to anyone who filled out a detailed feedback form. The first version was ugly, functional, but clunky. Still, 3 people signed up. I cried when the first payment came through, $27. It wasn't much, but it was mine. But, earned, built, real. I sent my mom a text that day. Not bragging, just a simple, sign my first user today. Building a product for therapists. Will keep you posted. She replied an hour later, proud of you, but don't forget to keep looking for something steady. I didn't reply, just let it sit, because that's what her praise always came wrapped in. Doubt, conditional support. But I'd stopped needing her belief to move forward. I was past that. For the next 6 months, I kept my head down. I worked odd hours, early mornings, late nights, weekends. I emailed every therapist I could find on LinkedIn. I wrote blog posts under a pseudonym. I joined webinars I didn't even understand just to learn the language of licensing and compliance. I got my first dozen users, then 30. Then a small partnership with a mental health startup that wanted to offer Quiet Mind as part of its onboarding package for solo therapists. That's when things shifted. Suddenly, I wasn't just building a tool, I was building a company. And yet, I didn't tell anyone. Not my mom, not Becca, not even my old college friends who still thought I was in transition. Because something in me knew, if I told them too soon, they'd look for cracks. Doubt it, shrug it off. So I let the silence grow. The kind of silence that feels like planting something underground. No one sees it, but one day, it blooms. It's strange how hope creeps back in. Quiet at first, like a stray cat testing your porch. Then one morning, you look up and realize it's made a home inside you again. That's how I felt around month 10. Quiet Mind was still small, still bootstrapped, still living in the shadow of bigger platforms with glossier websites. But something had shifted. I'd gone from hoping someone would use it to knowing they needed it. The therapists I worked with started recommending it to their peers. Not just because it worked, but because I listened. I tweaked things for them, fixed bugs in real time, sent personal thank you notes with every update. It wasn't a business. Not yet. It was a relationship. And that intimacy, that sense of someone built this for me, it was something the big guys had forgotten how to deliver. Then came the first conference. One of my earliest users invited me to speak on a virtual panel about ethical tech in mental health. I almost said no. What would I even say? I didn't have a team. I wasn't funded. I didn't even have an office. Just a desk wedged between my bed and a pile of laundry I never folded. But she insisted. So I said yes. I bought a $19 ring light, slapped on a blazer over pajama bottoms, and clicked into the Zoom room with my heart hammering in my chest. And you know what? People listened. Really listened. I spoke about building with empathy, about respecting user boundaries, about how solo practitioners are often forced to hack together systems never designed for them, and how I wanted to change that. When I logged off, my inbox had 12 new emails. By the end of the week, I had 18 new signups, and 2 angel investors asking if I'd consider raising a seed round. I said no, not yet, because I still had more to prove. To myself, mostly. I spent the next 6 months refining the platform, simplifying onboarding, creating templates that made documentation easier, adding encrypted backups and compliance flags without turning it all into legal spaghetti. It became solid, not just usable, but sticky. People weren't just trying it, they were relying on it. And then, right when I'd started thinking about hiring my first part-time support rep, an email landed in my inbox that made me stop breathing for a second. Subject line: licensing proposal. Interested in collaboration. The sender: a mid-sized EHR company looking to offer Quiet Mind as a white label add-on for their behavioral health clients. The name on the email signature caught my eye. Stephanie Bauer, VP of Product Strategy, Meditech Partners. Meditech. I knew that name, because that was the same company my mother's boss, Craig, never shut up about. They were the ones pushing into new verticals, talking about acquisitions, dreaming of expanding their SaaS portfolio. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I walked to the kitchen, stared at the humming fridge, and whispered to no one, "Holy shit," because it hit me all at once. The woman my mother called a failure had built something her own boss's company now wanted to license. I wanted to laugh, or cry, or both. But instead, I opened a new document and wrote one word at the top in bold: power. Not revenge, not ego, just a quiet, grounded sense of power, of leverage. The kind I'd never had in that house, or at that steakhouse, or on the end of those judgmental calls. I finally had something no one could belittle or brush off. They couldn't mock it because they needed it. They couldn't dismiss me because now I was the one they had to pitch to. That weekend, I treated myself to a cheap bottle of Prosecco, the kind that tastes like fizzy lemonade but feels like luxury when you drink it out of a chipped mug in your pajamas. And I toasted to me, to the version of myself who never stopped, who stayed up coding while the world slept, who cried in silence but never quit. Then I drafted my reply to Meditech, polite, curious, professional, and just confident enough to hint that they weren't dealing with some broke freelancer anymore. They were talking to a founder. The first meeting with Meditech was supposed to be a quick intro call. Just exploratory, they said. But when I logged into the video chat and saw 5 people in the virtual room, 2 with titles I had to Google, I knew this was bigger than they let on. Stephanie, the VP of Product Strategy, took the lead. Polished, poised, warm, in a way that didn't feel fake. "Maya," she said, "we've been tracking Quiet Mind quietly for the past few months. The therapists you're serving, they're exactly the niche we've been trying to reach for years." I smiled, kept it cool. "We've noticed you're doing something that even the big platforms haven't nailed. User trust?" she added. "They like you." I almost laughed. Like me? I couldn't even get my own mother to like what I was building. Instead, I leaned in and asked the kind of question I'd never had the courage to ask before. "So, what does Meditech want?" There was a pause, and then Stephanie said it. "We're interested in acquiring the platform. Full rights, full integration. You'd stay on in a leadership role. Your team could expand. And yes, there'd be a significant payout." I nodded slowly, as if weighing the offer. Inside, my brain was screaming. I kept a straight face, asked for the proposal in writing, gave them a soft timeline, hung up. Then I stood up from my desk, still the cheap IKEA folding table I'd had for years, and walked straight to the kitchen. I didn't even make it to the sink before I started shaking. Not because I was scared, because I realized this was it. The moment all those quiet, humiliating sacrifices had been leading to. But fate, it wasn't done with me yet, because 2 days later, Stephanie emailed again, this time with an invitation. "Meditech would love to meet you in person next week to finalize the offer. We're hosting the executive board at our regional office in Chicago. Craig mentioned you're local, Craig, as in my mom's Craig, as in the man who sat next to her while she laughed at my freelancing from the bedroom and asked if I'd considered going back to school for something practical. I stared at that email for 5 full minutes. Then I typed back, "I'm available." That week, I prepped harder than I'd ever prepped for anything. I printed copies of usage data, retention numbers, screenshots of therapist testimonials. I polished my pitch deck, got my one decent blazer dry cleaned. And the night before the meeting, I called my mom just to check in. She sounded distracted, as usual. Said she was prepping for a big exec presentation at work. "Craig says it's a make-or-break meeting," she added. "Apparently, they're trying to close a deal with some tech company no one's heard of." I bit my lip. "No one?" I asked lightly. "Some boutique app thing," she said. "Mental health something or other." I smiled into the phone. "Good luck tomorrow," I said. "You might be surprised." She didn't ask what I meant. She never did. The next morning, I walked into Meditech's downtown office wearing that dry-cleaned blazer and a calm, steady smile. The receptionist handed me a visitor's badge with my name printed on it in bold. I looked at it for a second. Maya Lane, Quiet Mind founder, and slipped it onto my lapel. They led me to a glass-walled conference room with a long mahogany table and a breathtaking view of the skyline. The room was already filling up. I recognized Stephanie and 2 of the investors who dialed into our last virtual call. And then I saw her, my mother, sitting at the far end of the table in a gray blazer I'd seen hanging in her closet since I was a teenager. Her back was straight, her face professionally unreadable, and sitting beside her, Craig. He looked over his glasses as I walked in, then leaned slightly toward my mother. I saw her freeze, just for a second. Then her eyes met mine, and I watched it happen. Recognition. Disbelief, panic, masked quickly, but not fast enough. I smiled. Not cruelly, not smugly, just calmly. Like someone who no longer needed anything from the room, except to finish what she started. I took my seat, opened my laptop, and began my pitch to the room. The first 5 minutes of the presentation are all facts and numbers, metrics, growth curves, user retention. I speak clearly, confidently, with just enough polish to remind the room I didn't stumble into this. I built it. But I can feel her eyes on me the whole time. My mother, 2 seats down, staring like she's watching someone wear her skin. Like she can't quite reconcile the person in front of her with the version of me she's always carried in her head. The underachiever, the disappointment, the daughter who quit too many jobs, lived out of boxes, and never figured it out. Stephanie jumps in halfway through, highlighting why Quiet Mind is outperforming legacy systems. She points to the UX simplicity, the client trust scores, the surprisingly low churn rate, all of it. Stuff I sketched on the back of diner napkins in year 1. Craig clears his throat. His voice is smoother than I remember. Salesman slick. "Maya, this is impressive," he says, leaning back with practiced ease. "But tell me, what happens if a bigger player copies your features and undercuts your pricing?" I meet his gaze. Steady. "They've had 10 years and hundreds of millions in funding to serve these practitioners," I reply. "They didn't. I did. And now I have their trust." Stephanie nods. "And therapists are notoriously loyal to tools that respect their workflow and boundaries. Quiet Mind isn't just software. It's become part of how they run their practice." Craig shifts. For once, no clever retort. My mother still hasn't said a word until the end of the meeting. Stephanie wraps up by summarizing the proposed terms. Full acquisition of Quiet Mind, with me remaining as CTO, a generous salary package, a 3-year earnout with equity, and the kicker, $4.7 million in immediate stock options upon closing. I nod, my voice calm. "That works for me." A few execs smile. Craig leans over, shaking hands. And then, finally, my mother speaks. Her voice is tight, polite. "Maya, would you mind staying after for a few minutes? I'd like to speak with you." The others file out slowly. The room empties. It's just us now. She doesn't sit. She walks to the window, arms folded, staring out like she's trying to piece together the past few hours into something she can live with. "I didn't know," she says finally, voice low. "I figured," I answer. She turns, eyes flicking to mine, the way they used to when she was about to scold me for something I didn't actually do. I'm not sure what to say. I let the silence sit, then, you don't have to say anything. But she does. Of course she does. I thought you were wasting your potential, she says. You always had talent, but no direction, no discipline. I had direction, I reply, just not the one you wanted. She exhales sharply. I was trying to protect you. I didn't want you to get hurt chasing something that might never happen. I nod slowly. I get that, but you didn't protect me. You dismissed me. That lands, I see it. The words hit harder because they're not said with anger, just quiet truth. She lowers her eyes. I was wrong, she whispers. I almost wish she hadn't said it. It feels like a line from a movie. Too clean, too late. But then she adds something real. I kept thinking, if you didn't follow the path I knew, then I couldn't help you. So I tried to steer you back. My throat tightens because that I understand. That fear of not knowing how to love someone outside the lines. I nod again, softer this time. I know, Mom. She walks closer, not all the way, but enough to shrink the space between us. I'm proud of you, she says, and for the first time in my life, I believe her. But I don't say thank you, because this isn't about approval anymore. It's about standing on ground I built with my own hands, whether she recognizes it or not. We leave the building in silence, parting in the lobby without hugs or promises. Just two women who finally saw each other clearly for the first time in years. That night, I signed the acquisition documents. And I don't cry. I don't drink. I don't even celebrate. I just sit on the edge of my bed. Yes, still a mattress on the floor, and let the weight of it settle. Not just the money, not the title. The fact that I did it. Without applause, without shortcuts, and most of all, without her permission. 2 weeks later, I walked back into that same building, but this time not as a guest. I had a badge, an office, a title, Chief Technology Officer. Funny how fast people learn your name when it's followed by a few capital letters and a comma. The receptionist smiled differently. The junior execs nodded a little deeper. Even Craig adjusted his tone from smug to smooth, like trying to shake off the memory of his questions during our first meeting. And my mother? Well, she didn't say much. She passed me in the hallway on my first day with a tight smile and a small nod, as if unsure how to greet me now. Was I still her daughter? Or had I become something she didn't quite have language for? I didn't push it. We weren't going to have some made-for-TV reconciliation moment by the elevators. She wasn't built that way. Neither was I anymore. Instead, I focused on the work. The first 6 weeks were a blur of onboarding, team alignment, and migrating Quiet Mind's infrastructure without breaking what made it special. I hired a small team. People I'd met through forums, Slack groups, and one brilliant dev I'd worked with during those lean months when I could barely afford to pay him. Every day I walked into that office, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Home. Not because the building was fancy, not because of the view, but because I was finally seen. Not as someone trying to make it, but as someone who had. The old guard didn't love it. More than once, I overheard mutters in the hall. The startup girl? Fast-tracked. But I didn't care because I knew the product. I knew the people we built it for. I wasn't here to play politics, I was here to build. And build we did. By the end of Q1, Quiet Mind had outpaced projections by 60%. Customer satisfaction surveys were off the charts. Therapists were tagging us in posts with captions like, "This software finally gets us." At the next board meeting, I sat at the same table where I'd once pitched nervously. Only now, I led the conversation. I watched as Craig nodded through my numbers, trying not to look impressed. And my mother? She didn't even attend the meeting. She'd quietly stepped back from the Meditech team handling my division. I wasn't sure if that was her choice or someone else's. But either way, it gave us both space. Until one afternoon. I was walking back from a late lunch, still finishing off a coffee when I saw her in the lobby. She was standing near the exit, coat folded over her arm, staring out at the street like she wasn't sure she wanted to leave. I slowed. She turned, saw me, smiled gently. "I'm retiring," she said. like it was the most casual thing in the world. I blinked. Since when? Effective Friday, she replied. Craig's moving to New York? I figured it was time. I didn't say anything for a second. She looked tired. Not in a defeated way, just finished. Like someone who'd reached the last chapter of a long, complicated book and finally decided to put it down. I wanted to say goodbye, she added. And congratulations. I nodded. Thanks. She hesitated, then stepped a little closer. I used to think success looked a certain way, she said. Promotions, paychecks, respectability. I raised an eyebrow. And now? She smiled. Now I think it looks like watching your daughter walk into a building she owns. I didn't cry. Neither did she. We weren't the hugging kind, never had been. But as she reached for the door, she turned and said, You were never a failure, Maya. I just didn't know what success looked like on someone who didn't need me. And then she was gone. Just like that. No apology, but no denial either. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. It's been almost a year since that final conversation. Quiet Mind now serves over 10,000 mental health professionals. We're launching a new mobile interface, expanding into Canada, and onboarding clinics that used to laugh at indie tools built by bedroom founders. But none of that is what I think about most. What I think about is that night after the board signed off on our expansion plan, the night I finally moved into my own place. Not an apartment, a home, 2 bedrooms, hardwood floors, soft yellow light that spills in through the kitchen window around 5 p.m. The first night I slept there, I lay on the floor in the middle of the living room, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes and half-empty wine. No mattress, just a blanket. And I thought back to that steakhouse, to the candle I didn't blow out, to the laugh that stung like a slap, to my mother's voice saying, maybe 31's your lucky number. She wasn't wrong. 31 was when everything changed. But not because of luck, because of work, because of grief. Because I stopped asking for a seat at the table and built my own instead. People ask me now, all the time, what made me keep going. They think there's a secret. There isn't. I kept going because stopping would have meant agreeing with them. And I couldn't. Not then, not ever. I learned that your worth isn't measured in job titles or paychecks or who claps at your birthday dinner. It's measured in how you respond when no one is watching, in how you keep building when there's no applause, in how you hold your vision steady when even the people who raised you think you're lost. A few months ago, I got an invitation to speak at a Women in Tech Summit. They wanted to highlight female founders who broke through without funding, without co-founders, without pedigree. I said yes. The keynote opened with a montage of every speaker's career milestones. IPOs, Forbes covers, product launches. Mine ended with a clip someone had pulled from a therapist's TikTok. A screen recording of Quiet Mind's dashboard with a caption that read, "Whoever made this, thank you. You saved my practice." That's when I cried. Not for the money, not for the title, but for that one sentence. For the reminder that what I built mattered, that I mattered. Last week, I visited my mom. She'd downsized to a quiet condo outside the city. When I walked in, she had the kettle on like nothing had changed. But on the shelf by the kitchen window, I saw something new. A small framed printout of an article about Quiet Mind's growth. My name was bold in the headline. She didn't mention it, neither did I. We sat. We talked about small things, about ordinary things. But underneath it all, something had shifted. She saw me now. Not just as her daughter, but as a woman who made something from nothing, who turned silence into software, shame into structure. She asked toward the end, "Do you think you'll ever slow down?" I smiled. Maybe, but not yet. And I meant it, because I'm not done. Not with the work, not with the healing, not with rewriting what it means to be a failure. I leave her place just after sunset, the sky still streaked with gold. I get in my car, pull onto the freeway, and glance at the dashboard. A new notification from my team. New milestone hit. Quiet Mind just crossed 2 million sessions delivered. I pull over, take a breath, and for a moment, I just sit there, listening to the soft hum of the engine, the rush of wind outside, and the quiet voice in my chest that finally says, "You did it," not to prove her wrong, but to prove myself right. To all the women listening, maybe you've been called a failure. Maybe your dreams were laughed at, dismissed, or used as punchlines. But if there's anything I want you to take from this story, it's this. You don't owe anyone proof. You owe yourself a future. Build it anyway. Build it without their applause. Build it until the silence speaks your name. Because one day, when you least expect it, the room that once made you small will open its doors and hand you the keys. Thank you for listening. Leave a comment if this reminded you of someone or yourself. I'm Maya, and I finally own my story. Now it's your turn.